8 o'clock hour, and we will go ahead and get started. Very, very excited today to have one of our own and one of our former residents and faculty members here at Sinai to give grand rounds. So it is my great pleasure to introduce to everybody Dr. Rahul Chaudhary. So for our new members and our new residents, Rahul is one of our former residents and graduates from Sinai Hospital. And for old friends and colleagues here, welcome back to Rahul. So a little bit about Dr. Chaudhary. He obtained his medical school degree from the Maulana Azad Medical School in New Delhi, India. He did his internal medicine residency training right here at Sinai. And we had the great pleasure of him staying on here as academic teaching faculty as a hospitalist, a status post his training here as a resident. Dr. Chaudhary went on to do hospitalist medicine at the Mayo Clinic, and then ultimately his fellowship in cardiovascular medicine at the University of Pittsburgh. One of the things I was the most impressed when I was reviewing Dr. Chaudhary's CV is that throughout his path, and we knew that even when he was here, he was always working, always doing things above and beyond. So somewhere in the midst of all of these things that he was doing, he obtained his physician MBA from the Indiana University Kelley School of Business, and he is currently doing a Master's of Science in Computer Science from the Georgia Institute of Technology. Currently, Dr. Chaudhary is a cardiologist at the VA as part of the University of Pittsburgh, and he is also actively engaged as part of the AI Heart Lab, where he is the director and founder of that. Dr. Chaudhary is the author of way over 100 papers, book chapters, and abstracts, and his CV is full of his engagement, both in each place that he's been, with lots of scholarship and development of himself and the community around him, as well as now with the topic that he's going to speak to us today related to AI. So today, the topic of our lecture will be artificial intelligence in clinical decision support, from digital biomarkers to clinical implementation. Dr. Chaudhary, so wonderful to have you back, and again, welcome.
Thank you for the kind words. And I'm really excited to be back at the place that I trained and spent 6 years of my life. So it's really nice to see a lot of familiar names and familiar faces. I'm going to just share my screen and jump right into it. Can you see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
So my topic for presentation today is artificial intelligence in clinical decision support, from digital biomarkers to clinical implementation. This is my disclosure. Like, I have no relevant conflicts of interest, but I do have AI Heart Lab, which is a healthcare tech startup. Our learning objectives today will be basically three major big points. First would be to evaluate the current landscape and applications of AI-powered clinical decision support systems. Second would be analyze key considerations for successful implementation of AI tools in healthcare settings. And third would be to assess the ethical implications and future directions of AI in clinical decision-making. I'll be focusing first on the current landscape. So AI is becoming an integral part of modern healthcare, touching nearly every aspect of medicine. Its impact in healthcare delivery includes diagnostics to improve their accuracy, clinical decision support for faster decision-making in time-critical situations, resource optimization for enhanced efficiency in healthcare delivery, and clinical trial screening for enhancing clinical trial enrollment and helping patients get to appropriate therapies faster. This pervasiveness of AI underscores the importance for healthcare professionals to stay informed about the AI advancements in their respective fields. Now, this is a graph that shows the explosive growth of AI in healthcare A PubMed search on AI in healthcare revealed this exponential trend, with 2024 producing about 70,000 articles. Now, before diving deeper, I will start out with some basic definitions and how machine learning-based clinical decision support is fundamentally different from the clinical decision support tools that we as clinicians have traditionally worked with. I will start with defining the function of clinical decision support tools. Clinical decision support provides clinicians, patients, and other healthcare stakeholders with person-specific information intelligently filtered and presented at appropriate times to enhance healthcare delivery. Some examples of clinical decision support include order sets, which are tailored for specific conditions or patient types, reminders, which prompt clinicians about preventative care measures, and alerts that warn about potential drug interactions. Some of the key benefits of clinical decision support are enhancing patient care and safety by providing real-time evidence-based recommendations, increasing efficiency and reducing costs by automating routine tasks which reduce cognitive load on clinicians, supporting evidence-based practices by promoting adherence to clinical guidelines and best practices, enhancing clinical documentation and coding, and facilitating clinical research and trials. The next question that arises is, how is AI in clinical decision support different from the traditional rule-based clinical decision support tools? The fundamental difference between them lies in their approach. The traditional systems were rule-based or more like flowchart-based, which were defined a priori, as opposed to the AI-based clinical decision support, where the system is probabilistic, which means that the rules are not defined a priori, and instead patterns are captured from prior data and probabilities are generated based on the situation at hand. This fundamental difference makes the AI systems much more opaque in their decision making and necessitating their performance to be continuously monitored. Next, I will focus on the types of machine learning models and their subclasses. Machine learning models can be broadly categorized according to the type of data that they analyze, including structured data, unstructured data, medical images, and multimodal models. Structured analysis, or the structured data, uses traditional machine learning models with logistic regression and linear regression considered to be a type of basic machine learning models as the baseline models. These models process well-organized tabular data like patient demographics, lab results, and vital signs. And these were the most researched upon and the most used models prior to the advent of natural language processing. Now, unstructured data primarily consists of text from clinical notes, discharge summaries, and clinical reports, which are stored away in PDFs within the electronic health records. They have traditionally been inaccessible unless manually abstracted. However, the use of natural language processing techniques, along with the recent rapid advancements in large language models, have significantly improved our ability to contextually understand and analyze text. Here are some examples of closed source models where data needs to be sent to individual companies for analysis, like OpenAI, Claude, Google, and open source large language models, which can be locally deployed to analyze data within the internal healthcare ecosystem, like DeepSeek R1, Qwen, and Llama. The open source has caught up to the performance of the closed source, and there continues to be rapid advancements in this field. The next modality is computer vision, which is the ability to ingest the raw images and perform analysis directly on them. The key applications include X-rays, CT scan, MRI images, retinal images, ECG signals for prediction of pneumonia, atrial fibrillation, heart failure, etc. Some other applications that are being actively explored in the biomedical domain, including real-time surgical assistance and planning, pathology slide analysis, and skin lesion classification in the primary care setting. Then finally, there is the multimodal AI integration. This is an active area of development which combines the predictions from all the prior modalities of structured data, unstructured data, and imaging to provide a unified prediction model. We're yet to see capable models or examples within this subclass. As these systems continue to develop, it's essential for healthcare professionals to understand their capabilities and limitations to effectively leverage them in clinical practice. Now, most of my prior research was focused on personalizing antithrombotic therapy by measuring thrombogenicity using blood biomarkers in various cardiovascular conditions in close collaboration and mentorship from Kevin Blyden and Dr. Paul Gerbel from the Sinai Center of Thrombosis Research. But with the advent of AI, we decided to explore the utility of AI-based electronic health record-derived digital biomarkers to personalize therapy. Next, I will share some early work that we have undertaken as we continue to expand our footprint in this field. In our study of about 24,000 patients with atrial fibrillation who were on the anticoagulant, direct oral anticoagulants like apixaban or rivaroxaban, we showed that machine learning models outperformed conventional models for bleeding risk prediction. The benefit of earlier detection of high bleeding risk provides lead time to refer patients for alternative treatment options of the left atrial appendage occluder device implant, which does away with the need of lifelong anticoagulant therapy. We used explainable AI techniques and identified novel predictors of bleeding, including body mass index, cholesterol profile, which were not previously described to predict bleeding risk. And as a next step, we are in the middle of testing this model into clinical practice to evaluate its effects on earlier referral for left atrial appendage occluder devices as a clinical trial at University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. Our hope is that this will lead to improved patient outcomes by reducing bleeding events and also reduce healthcare utilization, so affecting the healthcare economics as well as patient outcomes. Similarly, we have used this approach in peripheral arterial disease to predict adverse events in patients post-revascularization for the potential to personalize antithrombotic therapy after the procedure, and have several other projects where we evaluated the use of AI in clinical implementation and for the discovery of novel pathophysiological mechanisms. Now, once machine learning models are developed and validated, the next steps towards their clinical implementation are more nuanced and compared to the traditional research that we are so used to in medical practice. Now, unlike traditional rule-based systems, machine learning models can experience what we call performance drift, which is basically a deviation in the accuracy or reliability of a machine learning model from its initial training and validation, making continuous monitoring a cornerstone of their real-world deployment. Some causes of performance drift include changes in patient demographics. For example, a model trained primarily on data from older adults may become less accurate if the patient population shifts to include younger individuals. With introduction of new treatment protocols or diagnostic criteria, they can affect model performance. Upgrading to new medical imaging equipment might alter the characteristics of the input data, and shifts in disease patterns like seasonal variations in disease prevalence that were not accounted for in the original training, or emergence of new disease variants like COVID-19 pandemic that the model has never been exposed to. All these factors can deteriorate model performance as the data the machine learning model was originally trained on is no longer reflected in the real world where these models are being deployed. The solution in this situation is the need for provisions for continuous reevaluation and recalibration to maintain model accuracy and reliability. This is where the role of clinical decision software or this clinical decision support software architecture comes in, as the continuous monitoring needs to be built into the design of these models. Now I will go through some of the design principles of the clinical decision support software. Broadly, the clinical decision support software consists of data pipelines, feature engineering pipelines, model deployment and versioning, provision of recommendations, and user interface or presentation of the recommendations integrated into the clinical workflow. Regarding data pipelines, the efficiency of clinical decision support systems heavily depends on the input data. Most commercial machine learning models offer electronic health record integration for automatic ingestion of data, but the healthcare organizations implementing it must be prepared for their data strategy to be able to deploy such models. Electronic health record integration also assures real-time synchronization and accurate data input that ensures that AI models always work with the most up-to-date information, which is crucial for accurate decision support. Now, regarding feature engineering, in order to achieve efficiency, improve interpretability, and cost effectiveness, the deployed machine learning models should have limited most significant variables as part of their trained and the deployed models. This can be achieved by utilizing domain knowledge and advanced modeling techniques. But as the data changes with evolving population, these need to be continuously modified as model performance starts deteriorating, necessitating a feature engineering pipeline. Model deployment and versioning also comes in multiple flavors, with two extremes being on-premise deployment, which offers greater control over data and security, and the other extreme being cloud-based deployment, which offers scalability, but needs more careful data handling, raising data security concerns and high cost from usage. Proper model versions and updating protocols are essential to ensure that the most updated and most accurate models are being used, and the ability to roll back to a prior version if the performance of an update degrades the prediction accuracy. The next part is provision of recommendations. The recommendations being provided should be contextual and account for the individual patient characteristics for them to have any clinical meaningfulness. The clinician should be able to understand the model outputs to instill confidence both in themselves and the patients for appropriate use in real-world clinical decision-making. Here, explanations of AI decisions using explainable AI are extremely important for building trust. And finally, the clinical decision software needs to be carefully integrated and the information presented to the clinicians as a part of the clinical workflow such that the notifications do not result in alert fatigue and become another click to be made in order to move on with the order I want to place, while ensuring important information is noticed. In case you're wondering how all of this is applicable to you in your practice, these are the insights of the software that will sooner than later be providing predictions in your respective fields and altering management strategies. It is essential to understand the anatomy of these tools now to improve confidence in their clinical use later as they get more and more implemented in clinical practice. Next, we will dive into the model evaluation metrics and their relative importance. The most important characteristics of a good predictive model include discrimination, which refers to a model's ability to accurately distinguish between cases where an adverse event occurs and cases where it does not occur. Calibration. Calibration measures how accurately the model's predicted probability match the actual observed frequencies of the disease. For example, when the model predicts a 70% chance of a disease, approximately 70% of those cases should actually have the disease. And classification. Classification compares how well this new model performs against existing models in terms of correctly identifying both positive cases, those with disease, and negative cases, those without disease. A good predictive model should have higher discrimination and lower values of calibration metrics and higher classification performance to provide reliable and accurate predictions. Now, machine learning models require more comprehensive evaluation than traditional models. which typically relied primarily on area under the curve. Currently, there are over 16 different metrics used to measure machine learning model performance, with new ones continually being developed and tested. Here are the key performance metrics: area under the curve, sensitivity, specificity, positive predictive value, negative predictive value, accuracy, precision, everything that you read in the while learning about statistics, like all of these values are active metrics that machine learning models use. Then there are some novel ones, including area under precision recall curve, precision, F1 score, G-mean. And you might wonder why we need so many different metrics rather than keeping things simple with just one or two standard measurements of model performance. The reality is more complex. Each of these metrics serve a specific purpose in machine learning models, because when developing and refining these machine learning algorithms into models, we need to optimize them based on two key factors. One is available resources, which is the capacity constraints, and the clinical impact of each decision. The choice of which metric to focus on during model development significantly affects how the model performs in practice. A model, for example, a model optimized for high sensitivity might perform very differently from one optimized for high precision. In other words, there is no universal metric that works best for all situations. The most appropriate metrics depend on the specific clinical context and practical constraints of each application. Now, regarding optimization strategies, the choice of which metric to optimize depends on the clinical context and consequences of error. For example, a cancer screening algorithm might prioritize high sensitivity to avoid missing cases, accepting more false positives as trade-off. This also means that this model cannot be extrapolated to other cancers than what it was trained on, and cannot be used to initiate a therapy, as this was strictly a screening model. Machine learning models have little wiggle room for extrapolation. Another example is that a decision point, which could result in a permanent device implant like left atrial appendage occluder, would focus more on optimizing for high positive predictive value, even if it comes at the cost of some missed cases. Now, regarding threshold selection, in traditional statistical models like logistic regression, threshold for sensitivity and specificity are often set during model development. For example, in atrial fibrillation, the CHA2DS2-VASc score has the threshold of more than 1 for a decision point about anticoagulation. However, the machine learning models allow for dynamic thresholding, which is both a boon, as it can incorporate changing prescription patterns, changing medications, and potentially offer more flexibility in clinical use. However, it also means that it needs continuous monitoring to determine what threshold to use in clinical practice, especially when there is variability in clinical practice. Now, this point about clinical application consideration just reiterates the points I've been making about the inability of the results of these models to be extrapolated outside the context of their training and intended use. Next, I'll examine interpretability and explainability in machine learning models. While these terms may sound familiar or similar, they have distinct meanings and implications in the context of machine learning. Interpretability refers to how easily humans can understand how the model makes its decisions directly from its internal workings. For example, a simple decision tree or a regression model is highly interpretable because we can follow its exact decision path. Explainability, on the other hand, refers to the methods that help explain a model's output after the fact, often using additional techniques to understand why the model made specific decisions. For example, SHAP values or line explanations are the techniques that we use that show which features contributed most to a particular prediction. There's often a trade-off between model performance and interpretability. Simple models like regression and decision trees are easy to interpret, but may not capture complex relationships in the data. On the other hand, complex models can achieve higher performance, but are harder to interpret. Depending upon the specific question that the machine learning model is intended for, there needs to be a balance between the need for high performance with the need for transparency. Here is an example of SHAP analysis from our paper, which shows the relative importance of specific features within a model's performance. Next, we will focus on continuous performance monitoring of the models and some key watchouts. Now, deploying a machine learning model requires a holistic approach from initial implementation to ongoing monitoring and maintenance. Now, what is needed for monitoring and maintenance? There needs to be real-time performance tracking, which can continuously compare model predictions with actual outcomes and monitor key performance metrics like accuracy, sensitivity, specificity in real time. There needs to be an automated alert system, which with setting up of thresholds for acceptable performance and implementing automated alerts when performance metrics fall below these thresholds, and periodic comprehensive evaluations to include diverse test sets to ensure continued broad applicability. Now, the challenges of continuous monitoring include ensuring the quality and consistency of new data is used for monitoring. There needs to be a clear criteria established to trigger model updates determined based on continuous performance evaluation. Automated monitoring needs to be combined with regular expert review from clinical champions to contextualize performance changes. And finally, staying informed about the evolving regulations like FDA guidelines on AI machine learning based software as a medical device, and incorporate compliance into monitoring processes. There are also some additional considerations while using machine learning models as a clinician or deploying them as an administrator. Since machine learning models learn from historical data, they can inadvertently perpetuate past biases if not carefully designed and evaluated. This means they could potentially embed and automate historical prejudices that healthcare has worked hard to eliminate, effectively reversing progress made in reducing medical bias. Now, one way is to ensure the models being deployed report their performance across all races and sex. Unfortunately, currently 95% of publications do not report performance across races or sex. Another equally alarming thing to note is what this Nature article showed, that 40 to 43% of AI-enabled medical devices authorized by the FDA lack published clinical validation data. This means that while these tools have met regulatory clearance, many have not been validated through rigorous clinical testing in real-world setting, but they present as vendors. The ability of robust clinical validation raises the concern about safety, efficacy, effectiveness, and generalizability of these technologies when they're applied in routine clinical practice. Next, I will go into a few case studies evaluating the role of bias. The first study was a Lancet Digital Health publication, which investigated the ability of AI models to predict a patient's self-reported race from medical images alone. The research team used both public and private data sets covering various imaging modalities like X-rays, CT scans, and mammograms. Their key findings showed that AI models had surprisingly high accuracy in predicting race, with area under the curve often exceeding 0.9 in test data. This performance was consistent across different imaging types and data sets, suggesting it's not due to specific imaging practices or populations. Even still, the ability to detect race persisted even when images were highly degraded or filtered, indicating that race information is deeply embedded in the images, and the researchers couldn't isolate specific image features or regions responsible for race detection, suggesting its input suggesting it's based on subtle, widespread characteristics. Now, what are the practical implications of this? This capability of machine learning model raises concerns about AI potentially perpetuating or worsening racial disparities in healthcare, and even attempts to make AI colorblind by removing specific features may be ineffective, given how deeply embedded race information seems to be. The study authors strongly recommend explicit auditing of AI model performance based on racial identity. They suggest including self-reported race data in medical imaging datasets to further facilitate research in this field. In another case study published in the journal Science, the authors examined a widely used algorithm in the US designed to identify patients who would benefit most from high-risk care management programs. These programs provide additional resources to patients with complex health needs as predicted by the machine learning models. The key finding of the study was that researchers discovered a significant racial bias in the algorithm's predictions. At any given risk score, Black patients were considerably sicker than white patients. For example, at the 97th percentile of the risk score, Black patients had a 26.3% more chronic illnesses than white patients did, which meant that the Black patients were systematically receiving lesser attention from the high-risk care management program, despite being at a higher risk. The bias stemmed from using healthcare costs as a proxy for health needs, as it encoded prior patterns of healthcare utilization. The algorithm was trained to predict future healthcare costs, not actual healthcare needs. Despite the best intentions, this choice of prediction target inadvertently coded racial bias into the algorithm. This biased algorithm highlights the need for reporting performance across races, specifically customized to the population mix the healthcare system deploying such a machine learning model serves. If these considerations are not incorporated right from machine learning model planning, once such models are developed and deployed, it is extremely difficult to debias them without changing their inherent structure. To summarize, this case study illustrates how problem formulation itself and choosing what to predict is crucial in developing fair and effective AI systems. Now, as the next part of the presentation, I will focus on key considerations for successful implementation of AI tools in healthcare settings, reiterating some of the points I've already covered earlier in the presentation. Here we will cover organizational structures, role of external expertise, cross-functional collaboration, detailed implementation cycle, and lessons from real-world AI applications in healthcare. Internal committees are a cornerstone for governing AI implementation and ensuring alignment with organizational goals and focus around providing governance and cross-departmental coordination. The committees should include a diverse set of stakeholders to address all aspects of implementation, from clinical relevance to technical feasibility and ethical considerations. For systems with limited internal expertise, external consultants can provide direction, especially in navigating complex regulatory landscapes like FDA guidelines for clinical decision support systems for AI, sharing best practices from other implementations, and helping organizations avoid common pitfalls. Regarding the cross-functional teams, successful AI implementation requires close collaboration between clinicians, administrators, data scientists, IT professionals, and individuals who can span multiple domains. Each group brings unique perspective and expertise essential for a holistic approach to organizational AI integration. Next, I will cover the ethical implications and the future directions of AI in clinical decision support. As a part of AI as a part of clinical decision support in healthcare should be viewed very similar to how traditional clinical biomarkers such as blood tests or imaging results have been viewed. Like these biomarkers, AI outputs provide information that aids in diagnosis, prognosis, or treatment decisions. This perspective is very important as clinicians need to interpret AI outputs in the context of other clinical information, just as they would with traditional biomarkers like CBC or BMP. Similarly, just like traditional biomarkers, AI tools require ongoing validation and quality control to ensure reliability and accuracy. Patient consent is an overlooked yet essential component in current research. Informed consent is a cornerstone of ethical medical practice, and this extends to the use of AI in healthcare. A major challenge in introducing AI in clinical care and obtaining informed consent from patients is the difficulty to explain these models in lay terms. And as more and more models are implemented in clinical care, there is more literacy about AI in general population. This issue will become increasingly relevant in the coming years. The AI in healthcare market is experiencing a rapid growth, with numerous companies and solutions entering the space. By 2028, it's predicted that the global AI in healthcare market is projected to reach $120 billion, growing at a compounded annual growth rate of 42% from 2022 to 2028. This is the fastest growing industry since IT came about, since computers came about. Now, this proliferation creates unique challenges as healthcare providers and organizations face difficulties in distinguishing between various AI solutions, especially in the setting of a lack of standardized metrics to compare different AI models objectively. To address these challenges, there's a growing need for standardized benchmarks and evaluation frameworks. There is more likely to be either independent third-party evaluations becoming more common to provide unbiased assessments, or organizations developing internal capabilities to evaluate the vendors using performance of the models on their data. Essentially creating what we call as model performance scorecards for individual organizations. This field uniquely also involves the need for research infrastructure to assess the real-world impact of the claims from the AI model providers, including patient outcomes and cost-effectiveness analysis, to justify the investment in AI technologies. Other challenges include the need for educational curricula to be developed to improve AI literacy amongst healthcare professionals and in medical training. Some of the emerging trends in this field include explainable AI techniques that can provide reasoning for their outputs, regulatory evolution, and of course, the ethical AI development and deployment. To summarize, we went through a lot of different concepts, new terminology. So I'm going to just briefly summarize most of the topics that we covered today. Include traditional clinical decision support versus AI-powered clinical decision support. What are the differences? What makes the AI-powered clinical decision support unique and important? We covered AI evaluation metrics, methodologies, and best practices, focused on interpretability and explainability and why it matters, focused on some key components for successful AI implementation, and the emerging trends and potential impact of AI in healthcare. And finally, I will leave you with this summary diagram summarizing the life cycle of AI model development and deployment within the healthcare system, from problem identification to model development, its integration in clinical practice, and the entire life cycle management that comes along with it. And I will be happy to take any questions from the audience.
Dr. Chaudhary, thank you very, very much. I feel like we got a little bit of the inside baseball on this thing to kind of learn a little bit more about the background of how sort of the ingredients of how this comes to bear. We'll start off with a question in the chat. This is from Dr. Friedman. How does human monitoring present a reliable method to validate concerns over data drift, for example? And how do we accept that AI can predict races by its secret sauce of interpreting X-rays when we can't be privy to how it realized this ability?
Yeah, those are really, really good questions. Regarding your first question about, so I'll address the second question first about how AI is able to come up and identify race, which none of the researchers are still able to figure out. It's the models are being developed in parallel to how the human neurons work and how the human neural networks are arranged. And that's why a lot of them, you'll hear the word neural network-based models. Unfortunately, they are not interpretable. Even people who have very good statistical and computer science knowledge, they just don't know how some of these predictions come about. And that is a little bit scary. And that also is the reason why we need more clinical trial-based studies that would show that they actually have the utility and intended utility and purpose that they're meant to have. Like, for example, Jardiance as a drug, and this is the parallel that I can think of, was like, we still don't exactly know what the mechanism of action is, but through clinical trials, we've shown its importance and its benefits across multiple different populations, where it clearly improves mortality and morbidity. So that's how I view this. And could you repeat the first question, please, again?
It's about how does the human monitoring present a reliable method to validate concerns over data drift, for example, and then about the race question.
So regarding the human expert role, and that's where the concept of clinical decision software comes in, because it needs to be a pipeline of when the model drift starts happening, because you cannot have enough human personnel resources to be looking into these models' performance on a daily or weekly basis, because we have so many other activities. And if AI adds on another activity to do, it's not solving the purpose that it's meant to solve. With that in mind, there needs to be a priority decision by domain experts in the place where it's being deployed as to how much variability in performance are we going to allow, and after how much variability will we say that now we need an alert system on a dashboard which shows that this model is not performing well, so that then the clinician is um,
Dr. Chaudhary, it froze for a minute, so I'm not sure if um, you are able to hear us.
can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I can. It went away for about 15 seconds.
Okay, so I will just rephrase my answer. So the reason that human expert validation needs to be involved, and it needs to be involved in a more of a nuanced way, is that these clinical decision software, they should have these automated systems where we allow, even before deploying these models, we allow the human experts and human domain experts and administrators to figure out the capacity constraints as well as the individual diseases threshold or variability of performance, beyond which it should have an automated alert saying that this is like, it's going beyond what we designed the system for, and it's not usable in clinical practice. And at that point of time, having a human evaluator, which is not just a clinician, it would be a clinician and a data scientist, who would go in and then start looking at the model specifics, its performance, and then basically debug the whole algorithm. And using this model, it's more likely that we don't add more work to the clinicians or the administrators, and actually help realize the potential of these machine learning models. And that's why this whole architecture in a clinical decision software support system is important.
Thank you. Next question is from Dr. White. Do you have recommendations for reliable sources of scorecards or validation verification, such as those that you mentioned?
So these are still concepts in development, and we are trying some of these like model scoring cards. And it's funny, they're actually based off in theory on the antibiograms that we develop for every single organization where we have the most resistant bugs and what they're like most susceptible to within that environment. Like that's the envisioned performance scoring models where different metrics would be reported, and on an ongoing basis you would be able to see like what on a monthly, like depending upon the individual case and when the alert comes in about the variability that the model is being retrained. So like it's almost like those antibiograms, but for machine learning models being generated that you can keep handy, or they can be available through the electronic health record itself.
Wonderful. This is Ann Yarba Gerbil's iPhone. So I think this is Dr. Gerbil. Rahul, congratulations on your great work at UPMC. We are very proud of you. How will AI change our efforts at the Center for Thrombosis Research to refine personalized antithrombotic therapy?
I think one of the, and thank you so much for your kind words, Dr. Gerbil. One of there are several places where it can be implemented in research. The way I envision AI in this EHR, like unlocking the data that we have in EHRs, is AI screened and biomarker guided personalization of therapy, because then you have a really nice screening test that can actually go through the entire electronic health record system, identify the patients who are most likely to have a response failure or responsiveness to a therapy, and then using biomarkers as more like a specific, almost like how we do it with HIV. We have a screening test and then more highly specific test. And that specific test would be biomarker guided personalization of therapy. And this is how I envision that at the Center of Thrombosis, the Sinai Center of Thrombosis, we could, if we were to deploy AI-based solutions within UPMC, then they could, within Sinai Hospital, they could act as these like screening tools that can help with patient enrollment, as well as they can help like get the right patients, the right biomarkers, and we can use that for personalization of therapy.
Thanks, Rahul. So question, I think fundamentally with anything with AI, obviously here we're talking about clinical decision making, but AI is obviously exploding for basically everything at this point. And again, I'm going to ask a very simplistic question, but I think you'll understand why I'm asking. So I think in the end, right, like the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. So in the end, there's something that is controlling or guiding all of these things. And I think, in the clinical side, obviously we operate based on data. We look at clinical trials. We look at consensus from our different societies. When there's not clear data, what a bunch of experts think on something, and sort of move there until there's more data to support. How, and again, because in the end of this will be out there and this will be monetized and there will be businesses that are doing these things. How do we as the end user know that a product is not out there anchored in certain data sets? Because you can pick what you are going to select from to come to the conclusion that you're going to come to. And we've had conversations related to AI, even in diagnosis, where we're also all very aware it's as good as the data that you put in, right? So if you are not asking the question, did you travel somewhere and did you do this and did you do that, your differential is completely different. So in this same way, how does the AI know what is good data? Like you can take things get published, right? Even in good journals that you can critically review and like, oh, this is really flawed because of X, Y, and Z, even despite a peer review process. How do we know that the data within whichever AI algorithm is actually really validated and good data beyond a peer review process?
So it's really interesting you bring up that question, because I'm going to actually go back to even journals publishing these articles. There's a significant lack of expertise within the healthcare domain in this field, with the intersection of healthcare and AI. And I've in fact been sending a flurry of letter to the editors on published articles that are missing basic components of management, because they are publishing, like I went through the three different metrics that you should be at least focused on: discrimination, calibration, reclassification. The papers that even in the highest journals like JACC and JAMA, these papers are somehow seeping through that are not reporting one or more of these metrics. And that and this is all where like education, understanding about AI, how it's evaluated, what is the specifics. So this needs to be incorporated within the education system itself, like whether through like CMEs, and even like this is all still in development. This like I don't think there's very many CMEs meant for clinicians for AI. Um, However, like, and this is where like I think the next steps need to be, that this is coming. This is coming through the business side of things and not research side of things. And as clinicians, as researchers, it's almost prudent for us to like not create a firewall, because AI does have a real impact on patients, on outcomes, but to be able to create like a filtering mechanism, that we make sure that only the good ones, the good models come through. Now, how do you create that filter? Every organization, and this is not something that can be done. Like there's no like really good answer for this without like utilizing or reorganizing your current resource structure for the organization. One possible thing that I have seen, and this is something that some of my colleagues and I have been thinking about doing as well, is to develop these independent companies that provide almost like the credit scoring system that we have for credit. Those are independent. Equifax, like it's an independent entity that provides the credit score based off on collected data. So similar companies coming up with the essentially a standardized scorecards, like even for something like an ambient AI scribe, there is so many different providers right now, but like we don't know what their word accuracy is, except for one or two papers that came out 5 years ago or 3 years ago, and those models have definitely changed from since then. So that's one part. The second would be for the hospital system, at least the big major healthcare systems, to develop their own internal committees that can vet these models, and these committee members should have that knowledge to be able to vet these models. But essentially, this is a field that's coming through commercialization, and the software engineers finally have a way of getting inside healthcare tech with minimal regulatory compliance.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's a obviously rapidly expanding field, and it's I have not seen something so quickly being utilized and developed. And also we've had the opportunity to have some other speakers in some other domains, but even in the impact of the actual research that it has impacted so quickly.
Right. And that's why I decided that like instead of like I could have gone into very specific niche domain specific AI applications, I decided to focus more on like the general principles and what a clinician and administrators should know, because this is coming. No matter where you are, what you do, whichever part of healthcare administration or clinical practice, or whichever domain you practice in, this is coming.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Chaudhary, thank you for a wonderful, wonderful presentation. We learned a lot, and like I said, Phil, like we got the back inside scoop on how this is happening. And again, to have a window into the work that you have done in your years since you have been here at Sinai is just wonderful. And obviously, your ongoing collaboration with Dr. Gorbel and his team, which is great as well. So thank you so very, very much.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Dr. Chaudhary did give his email. So if anybody has any questions, I know that he would be happy to hear from you. If you need that from us later on, please just reach out to me. All right. Thanks everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Rahul, again, wonderful to see you. Give our best to Connie, okay?
Will do. Thank you.
Take care. See you.